Hello everyone. This is the third of the 4 videos over the Supreme Court cases. In this video we'll look at the 5th and 6th Amendment court cases. So there's 8 of them. The first one is Miranda versus Arizona. This one should be familiar to you because they're known as your Miranda rights. So he got arrested and didn't really know why. Didn't know what his rights were. This then sets what every person arrested is told so that they know what they are. So it guarantees certain rights to suspected criminals, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. Anything he says can be used against him. It also secures the due process clauses of the 5th and 14th Amendment, because it solidifies the process that happens when you get arrested and when you have court proceedings. So Miranda versus Arizona, think those Miranda rights, right to remain silent, have an attorney. The next one is Henry Galt. So what happened was Henry Galt was making these obscene prank phone calls to a neighbor. And he was only 15 years old, but he keeps calling his neighbor, making all these really obscene phone calls to her. And she knew exactly who it was. The police go over to his house. He is home alone. Both of his parents are at work. They ask him, "Hey, did you make these phone calls?" He right away says yes. He's arrested and taken into custody, and his parents are never notified. He's never told that he has a right to remain silent. He's never told he has a right to an attorney, or anything like that. And the main reason he's not is because he's a juvenile, and there wasn't any precedent of juveniles having the same due process rights as adults. So this goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides that his constitutional rights were not followed, and that his parents should have been notified immediately, that he should not have been questioned without his parents present, and that kind of set those standards we have. Okay, the next one is Griswold versus Connecticut. This court case established substantive due process. This means that the law must be reasonable and fair. If the law is not reasonable and fair, then basically it's unconstitutional and you shouldn't follow it. So it mainly dealt with birth control and whether or not it was anyone's business whether it was being used. So Griswold kept using and selling different birth control measures, and was arrested for that. And that's where we get this idea that substantive due process, that it was never a reasonable and fair law to begin with because of rights to privacy. All right, the last of the Fifth Amendment ones is a pretty controversial case. It's Kellow versus the City of New London. So the Fifth Amendment has always had eminent domain. So this idea that the government can buy private property, can force you to sell private property if it is for public good. And it's always been this idea of for public use and public good. So you usually see it for widening a road, and that's considered to be a public road and public good. However, Kellow versus the City of New London changed how eminent domain works, because it could now apply to private businesses taking private property. And what they said was, okay, so you have maybe a blighted area, and Kellow versus the City of New London said they can be forced to sell that area for a private company to use, As long as they are given under these three conditions, they are given fair warning, they pay the owner a fair price, and they use the property for public use, such as roads, schools, or airports. Now it can be added, this fourth one, where it can also be used for private businesses as well, under this idea that it makes the area better for the public. But obviously that's different. So it's always been a little bit of a controversial one. So those are the fifth, and on to the sixth. So this first one is Betts versus Brady. And what happened here is Betts lost. Betts was arrested for a felony and argued that he should be given an attorney free of charge, that he had the right to an attorney and it should be granted to him. And the court disagreed with him, but they disagreed with him on a 5-4 margin. That's really, really close. That only takes one justice changing their minds, or one justice going off the court and someone else coming on. That's not much. So Betts loses this idea that if you're arrested for a felony, you have the right to an attorney. About 20 years later, you have Gideon versus Wainwright. And Gideon versus Wainwright is going to argue the exact same thing. He's also going to argue that he has a right to counsel for a felony case, and he's going to win. So now, if you are arrested for a felony, even if you cannot afford an attorney, one can be given to you, so that you are able to argue your case and get legal counsel. So what's important to understand there is how Betts versus Brady is a loss, and then it's changed with Gideon versus Wainwright, because we have this idea of a living constitution and that things change. The amendments change with time. All right, 28, here's Escobedo versus Illinois. What happened was he's arrested, and I think it's for 7 hours, he asked for an attorney. And for 7 hours, he's being questioned on these murder charges, questions. And for hours, he keeps asking, can I have an attorney? Can I have an attorney? I want my attorney. And the police interrogating him keep saying no and keep not letting him speak to an attorney. Eventually, he, in this interrogation, gives in and says that he murdered the other person. This court case, though, goes to trial and determines that a person's right to an attorney begins as soon as they are charged with the crime against them. The second they are charged, they have a right to an attorney, and if they ask for one, they have to get one immediately. It can't wait 7 hours. They can't keep questioning. Alrighty, the last one here is Shepard versus Maxwell. The issue here was Shepard versus Maxwell at the time was a high-profile case. It was like an O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, Trayvon Martin. It was a huge case. Everyone was watching it, and everyone in the public opinion case thought he was guilty. So he then has this public trial that he argued was biased against him because there was too much media bias against him. And the court agreed. So after he was found guilty, he was then given another trial because his first trial was seen as being too public, and that affected the decision that was made. So if there is, if the publicity of the trial affects the decision, then it is possible for a new trial to be given. This kind of changes the rules of double jeopardy, that if there's a reason to get rid of the double jeopardy in this case, they are allowed to. Some people think that if O.J. Simpson, for instance, were to have been found guilty, that he could have possibly gotten a new trial under the Shepard versus Maxwell precedent. The idea of the case being too public. Alrighty, those are your Fifth and Sixth Amendment cases. Just one more to go.